Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Can You Hear Me podcast. I'm Rob Johnson, president of Rob Johnson Communications.
And I'm Eileen Rochford. I'm CEO of the Harbinger Group, a marketing and strategy firm. Here on Can You Hear Me, we often are thinking of ways to help you advance in your career, help you stay at the top if you're already there, and how to pivot if your professional journey isn't giving you the satisfaction that you're looking for.
That's right. And today we're going to deal with the latter scenario there. Brett Trainor was in corporate America for many years, but recently founded the Corporate Escapee. That's a community and a podcast dedicated to helping GenX professionals escape the corporate confines and find freedom and balance. And we're lucky to have him on the podcast today. Brett, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm super thrilled to be here. I love you guys.
Thank you.
Listen,
Welcome.
We're excited to have you, man. The feeling's mutual.
Absolutely.
And by the way, Rob, before we get too far, is there a way I can hire you to do the introduction for my podcast? That was phenomenal.
That's right. Testing 1, 2, testing 1, 2. And that's
Seriously.
the way it is.
Doesn't hurt to have a 30-year veteran.
Flattery will get you everywhere.
Yeah. You're the best, Rob. Okay, Brett. So thanks for being with us. You are a very seasoned podcaster and a professional in so many ways that we're going to learn a ton from today. But before we dive into the concept of the corporate escapee, which I can't wait to hear all about, even though I know a little bit, why don't you share, for our listeners' benefit, your origin story? Essentially, how did you get to this point? What were the big milestones along the way and what led you here?
Yeah, I mean, we can go the 4-hour version or the 3 minutes, and I'll give you the shorter version. But essentially, my entire career was in corporate, 25 plus years, mostly in the B2B space, mostly in the go-to-market and the service side, almost all customer facing. I did have a couple of entrepreneurial ventures in that mix, but obviously none of them worked well enough to keep me out of corporate that I ended up back. It was about 2015 or 2016 was my last corporate role. Wrapped that up. Well, they wrapped me up, some combination of the two. And I decided to go into management consulting. At near 50 years old, I'm like, management consulting, shorter projects. It seems like a great idea. B2B, digital transformations here. Perfect. I wouldn't recommend anybody to do that at the end of their career. That's definitely more of a young person's game. But it was interesting. I did that for about a year and a half and realized it just wasn't for me anymore. I was still kind of an army of one. And what it taught me, though, was what my market value was, because I knew what they were billing me out at and I knew what I was getting paid. And a lot of the work as part of my role was to find new clients as well as some of the delivery. So I was already comfortable in the sales aspect of it. So I just, I got to that point, and we probably all have. I know you two probably have at some point. You just hit the breaking point of, what am I doing? Right? Right. I was chasing the corporate ladder, climbing the corporate ladder. If I can just get that one next promotion or that next, pay raise. And it just kind of hit me during that management consulting phase. Like, what am I doing? Am I going to do this for the next 20 years? I mean, I was energized by the work, but then just realized I was working for somebody else. And I just didn't know, where the path was going to take me and what I wanted to do. Do I want to be in the corporate for the next 20 years? Not a chance, but didn't know what I was going to do. And, it just ended up at that crossroad where I ended up deciding I'm going to go on my own. Didn't have a plan. Hindsight, have a plan, but that kind of started me down the path of the corporate escapee.
Did you have a client in hand when you did this, or did you just really wing it?
I did not. We just kind of got to the point they wanted me to go somewhere. I didn't want to travel. We agreed to disagree. And I said, I think I can do this. And that first 6 months when I left was chaos. I did get some success early with a couple of clients, right? And so you think, I got this figured out. How hard is this, right? And I kind of started at my 4-year journey where I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up, right? So the consulting wasn't really what I wanted to do. I stumbled into fractional leadership for small companies. If you guys have seen that, more of a buzz term with fractional. Did that for I just wrapped up my last client not too long ago. And then also, figured out some other ways to monetize my experience, right? Helping small brands connect with my network, right? In return, right? If they sold something, there was a commission that was paid for it. So I think over the course of those, 4 years, probably monetized 8 different ways. And that's when the idea said, there's got to be more people like me out there. Because the first 2 years I was solo, it was by myself. Only a few family and friends knew it. it's just not the way to do it. So I don't know if you guys kind of went that way or you announced to the world you went solo, but I didn't. In hindsight, I would have definitely let some more folks know.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great tip for our listeners, definitely.
And I got to tell you, to Eileen's point a second ago, to do it without a client initially, to be like, because I remember I was like, hey, I may want to do this consulting thing when I made my pivot from TV. And I did let everybody know because it was such a radical departure and I wanted people to give me an opportunity. But I remember getting my first big client and I'm like, I think I'm going to do this. But I tell people all the time, the mission accomplished banner is never hung. There's always work to be done.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And it is very difficult to go it on your own. No doubt about it. My path was a little different when I left corporate. I was a little younger. I was, I think, 31.
Okay.
And it was my switch, that got flipped was motherhood. And it was, I don't want to commute anymore. I don't want to travel anymore. I know I can form a network of like-minded senior communication professionals who want to deliver great work for clients without all the rest of the baloney that goes on inside of, larger agency environments typically. So, and we did have a couple of clients. We were very fortunate. Yeah. So it was different. But honestly, I would have walked out the door without the clients anyway.
Yeah, and that's what I tell folks. If you're thinking about it, it's okay to start ramping up, find that first client, even if it's pro bono, and you're just going to do some coaching, right? To get your feet wet, because and I'll stick to this, that it's at our age, or at least my age, I'm not sure how old you guys, I think we're close. Eileen, you might be a little bit younger. It's easier to find that first customer than it is your next job. And I think Don was on not too recently talking about job searches and how few positions there are, layoffs, everything else, that what we just don't have is the confidence to go do it on our own. Because I think, grew up Gen X, I grew up Gen X. We did have a ton of freedom as kids, right? I was a latchkey kid, right? 4th grade, I was coming home to an empty house. We really didn't have homework then, but you had to figure things out. And then you get put into the corporate box. And I remember early in my career, I'm like, let's do this, go, go, go. But eventually you get put into that box and it's like, don't rock the boat, right? Don't make a mistake so you don't get fired. And you just sort of go with the program. Now all of a sudden you can come back out. I tell people, if somebody's paying you to do a job, you can go solo, right? Have a plan, but you have the skill sets that small businesses absolutely need. So that's part of it, is just really the confidence, right? To get out there and test it.
I don't know if you know this, but there was also this woman, Eileen Rochford, as I was looking for the first, big engagement, who was giving me work and did some media training. And she knows to this day, I'm like, I will never forget what you did for me, what we continue to do for each other, but what you did for me when I was just getting into this, and having somebody like that say, yeah, you'd be great at this. And so I just wanted to share that because that was a big part of my journey too, getting some work. And the person that gave me that work is sitting right here on this same podcast. So I just,
that's awesome.
People should know that. That should not be overlooked.
Do. Yes. Yes.
Absolutely.
It's easy to recommend good people, Rob. That's all I can say.
Well, I appreciate it. And I appreciate that we're still here years later. So that's
right.
Awesome. So Brett, let me ask you this. When you were dissatisfied with where you were, how did you decide that you weren't just going to help yourself? You're like, okay, what am I going to do as a management consultant or whatever it was? And I know you said it wasn't a perfect fit, but how did you decide, okay, not only am I going to help myself, but I'm going to help other people as well? Because when you're making a radical change like that, because it is, you're worried about, what am I going to do? How am I going to take care of my family? How am I going to pivot to this new thing? But where did the corporate escapee come from? Where you're like, not only am I going to help myself, but I'm going to help others too, and be a resource for them.
Yeah, it's a good question. If you would have asked me this when I left consulting or corporate, my goal was just to make more money. I'm not going to lie. I mean, it was literally going to replace the money. But once I got into it and I got through the chaos period, right, where all of a sudden you own your own schedule, you're doing everything, the delivery, the calendar, everything. Once I finally got into routine, I realized how much more time I actually had and how much I hadn't valued that time in corporate. Because you do the commute, you mentioned the commute, these things, you just give up this piece. So I had that back. Then it dawned on me. I'm like, well, I've got more time. What am I going to do with it? And, how do I better take care? So I kind of found the balance. And I'm like, then I started to think how freeing this was for me. And I don't know, Rob, if I shared this with you, but about a year after I was out, my wife and I were having a conversation. I don't know what we were talking. She's like, what the hell was the matter with you? And she was talking about when I was still in consulting. And on the surface, everything would have been fine, right? All three girls were happy, doing well in school. It was a good job. It paid well. On the surface, everything was fine. But even she could realize, I was unhappy. And I didn't realize how unhappy I was until after I was out. And so it was about a year and a half ago, I said, there's got to be more people like me out here, right? And so that's when I started the Corporate Escapee, or rebranded the podcast. I've been doing it now for 4.5 years, and it's gone through some iterations, but I'm like, there's got to be more folks out here like me. And it did okay, right? I had a few ad hoc folks that I was helping coach out of corporate, but there really wasn't a ton. So I'm like, well, maybe I am one of the few people out there. And, that was really the motivation, is there's got to be more people to get out. But what really opened my eyes, Rob, when that happened, was I started messing around. I told my daughters I was going to start messing around on TikTok last November. They're like, Dad, no. And I'm like, the podcast's bad enough. You're going to do this. And I just started, I'm like, it's 90 seconds to 2 minutes of me either ranting or just sharing things. And it took off. I can't explain why. It's not like I'm highly produced. Rob would probably look at my TikTok and go, geez, man, you can be better than this. But the message resonated with people. And I think by the time this goes live, we'll be close to 40,000 people. And 80% of those folks are Gen Xers that are in corporate or just getting out of corporate. So the message hit. I'm like, all right, so I'm not alone. So how do we start to mobilize everybody to start, working together to stay out of corporate, to be honest with you?
Mm-hmm. So what are the themes, would you say, of what you're hitting when in the messages on TikTok in particular?
TikTok is just pointing out that, what are you doing next, right? I mean, if you look at the layoffs, there's no loyalty. This all sounds obvious from the outside, but sometimes when you're inside, you forget, right, that, hey, if I keep doing a good job. And part of it is just a reminder of where are you going? Because again, when I was in corporate, I wasn't thinking 2 years down the road, 5 years down the road. It was, just week over week, if looking for the promotion, whatever it was. And just, that's the theme that hits. I've got people sending me tips on when layoffs are coming in other companies. But what I found was I would always end each of the videos with, hey, come join the community. Or if you're just curious what life looks like outside of corporate, come join us. We've got the community that'll help, just support and educate yourself. Even if you stay in corporate, 100% fine. But what I found was people didn't realize that there was life after corporate. I think the belief was you had to start a full-on company or build the next Google or Facebook or open a restaurant. But there's ways to monetize your experience without having to hire a bunch of employees and do those things. So it's really a combination of, the currents just reminding people that, hey, corporate's not a pretty place. It's not for the faint of heart anymore. And you have other options. So it's kind of the blend of those two.
Nice.
I'm fascinated by the TikTok thing, because when we had first met and you were sharing that story with me about how, I'm sure, the younger kid, you tell your daughters like, what? I'm sure if I told my son, hey, I'm going to do that, he'd be like, what are you going to do? But that had to be a hugely pleasant surprise that you didn't have a footprint on there, right? On TikTok. Oh. And you were able to come and kind of introduce yourself and start giving some actionable items. You were sharing information that was useful to people in very digestible pieces, like you said, I think 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Was that surprising to you? Because when you and I were talking about it, I was like, man, TikTok? Because I don't do TikTok, because I always thought that's what our kids do. And here you are saying that's really where I was able to, have it take off a little bit more.
Yeah, it started everything. And it's funny, when I first started telling people about TikTok, I was apologizing for it. I'm like, yeah, I know it's TikTok. And I'm like, thank you, TikTok, for the way this works. And again, it's super easy there's no production, right? I mean, it's one take for me. You'll see some folks, they do multiple takes. And I'm like, one record. If I screw up in the beginning, then I'll start over. But, what you see is what you get. But yeah, I think the right message at the right time was hitting people that were frustrated. And the amount of time I said, thanks for the inspiration, or seeing, right, that it is possible. Because I think too often we get, I use it like the fitness, right? You get the Olympian that's telling you how you can improve your sprinting. Well, you're going from somebody that hadn't been working out all the way to sprinting. Give me somebody that was, improved, by a year, right? Or went from doing nothing to being able to run a half marathon. I think there's just more credibility coming from folks that are just ahead. I'm 6 months ahead of other folks on TikTok. So it's not like I've been doing this for a decade and finally figured it out. It was, right place, right time, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm certain that the rawness that you've described really feeds the authenticity and probably makes, how people receive your message that much more powerful to them. So that's probably actually a big thing in your favor.
Yeah, it was funny. Somebody told me afterwards, when I started adding the cultural aspect of it. So what's not the newsy type of thing, but, when layoffs are, quiet quitting and coffee badging and those types of things. And, part of my message is, man, if you're 50 years old and you have to ask somebody to take time off, I'm like, what are we doing? Right? It's just, and the micromanagement was a big one. I'm like, that was a big thing for me, is you've been doing your job for 30 years and you got somebody over your shoulder telling you to come in the office to do this. I'm like, it just seemed really broken. And sometimes I have to question myself, am I just too close in the middle of this all the time, with things fundamentally changed? I think things have fundamentally changed. And, again, but listening to your Don episode about what's going on with corporate, I think they're doing things like the layoffs. Everything is short-term, profit-driven, shareholder and executive-driven. And unlike, I say, the old days of 5 years ago, at least they used to pretend, right, that this wasn't for business or profit reasons. But when you have companies that have record quarters, yet they're laying people off, and they're just almost unapologetic about, you're just a number. And it's me, and just reminding them, like, hey, you're just a number. They're not gonna, and you're gonna be the expensive number. So guess who's gonna get caught first? And just have a plan.
Yeah. And don't hook your star on someone else's success. That's a real big part of it, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. You can, one of my favorite things is when people ask me, for advice and are thinking about what to do, the next, path to take in their career. I firmly believe that the best bet you'll ever make is betting on yourself. And I say that all the time. And you'll never make more money than you do working for yourself, in my opinion. Certainly experience 100%. As well. Yeah, that's the truth.
That's such a great point, Eileen, because that's what I did. I was like, man, it's all, the business that we're in is relative to communication, but it was like I had a different kind of communication job. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to limp my way into, retirement. I want to pivot and do something and provide real value and bet on myself. And that's what I did. And I'm having more fun doing it than I could even imagine. And at our age, I'll give us a little. We're not exactly the same age, but I think you made a great point about asking for time off or having to. I think all the time about being able to work from anywhere and being able to take calls from anywhere and being able to go to meetings anywhere and still totally be able to do things I want to do without having to say, oh, can I get vacation? Oh, I don't have seniority, or oh, I don't have this. It was just at this point in my life, and I don't want to speak for everybody, it was a really big factor in what I did. And when I tell people about it all the time, I'm like, I love the work. I love the flexibility. And at this point in my life, I don't want to have to ask for permission. So that's a really great point you made.
Yeah. Freedom and autonomy. It's amazing how hard it is to put a price tag on that, isn't it?
Until you have it, right? Once you taste it, then you're like, oh, I get it. Now I'm not going back, right?
I have been approached twice with some really, really big jobs and got to the point of I said yes to one of them before I woke up the next morning and said, Eileen, what the are you doing? It was hard to go back and say no. At that point, it was quite embarrassing, but I did. It's like, not happening. Sorry, guys.
But it worked out. Yeah. And it's funny, I think, but if you've been in the corporate for 20, 30 years, you bet on yourself to get the job, right? But you don't usually bet on yourself to, take everything that you've learned and then go apply it. And it's, I think it's you're right. I didn't realize what I didn't know until now. And now it's just, how do we educate? And again, you guys are spreading the word. You've built your own solo companies. And as I think we were talking before, that, there's still stress. So we're not, at least I'm not talking on here to say everything's super easy. You're just going to go make all this money. You're going to work an hour a day. No. But when you wake up with stress, it's your own stress, and there's something you can do about it, right? You're in control of what you do and the path that you take versus, corporate. It's somebody else's priorities. It's somebody else's schedule. It's you may have some input, but you don't own it.
No. And you're certainly not deriving, the same amount of revenue profit at all. Not even close. Yeah. So yeah, it really does come down to freedoms. You have the freedom to say yes to the work that you take on, the freedom to set your schedule that suits your lifestyle and maybe how your brain works. Maybe you're better at night than you are in the morning, having to be at work by commute and all that and get there to start by 9 o'clock may not be for you. But when you do it for yourself, you get to decide. And that's an incredibly powerful position to be in. It's life-changing. Mm-hmm. So, Brett, it's obvious that you kind of have your pulse on the current professional landscape and all the things that are, good and bad in the corporate world in particular. From your perspective, what do you believe the future of work will look like? And let's talk about that. And what does that mean for those in corporate and for those who maybe are choosing to stay out or go out?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think part of the reason why I'm so excited about the Escapee movement is the time has never been better for us to leverage that experience, because I think the future of work is going to be solo companies, right? I mean, the one stat I saw in a Asana study not too long ago that had, what was it? It was knowledge workers, right? 27% of the time knowledge workers were doing knowledge work. And so I just translate that into corporate, right? So you think about your corporate job on a given week, if 30% of your time was spent actually doing the job you were hired to do, that was a good week, right? Unnecessary meetings, all those other things. So 30%. So when I think about small businesses that need and could leverage, right? Can you imagine Rob going into a business to help them with their media and their training? There's no way they could have afforded him before, but now with new business models, there's ways you can support those small businesses. And I think they're better situated to leverage technology. They have access to talent they've never had access to before. And I don't think they're married to the old models, right? So if you think of the old bigger companies, everything has a silo. You know what those silos are? Is operating budgets, right? And somebody's in charge of those operating. So to get better, you have to go across, except nobody wants to give up anything. So it's going to be like turning a Titanic with those companies. All of a sudden now we've got folks we can slide into businesses that are small, ready to scale with technology, AI coming in, and people such as us that can help them grow the businesses. It makes too much sense. The way I share, I'm going a little bit of a rabbit hole, but the tangent is because I'll have people in corporate say, well, how are they going to afford me? I'm like, look, use the 27% analogy, power of 27. That, hey, when you work with me, I'm only charging you for the 27%. It's not the overhead. You're going to pay for the outcomes, right? We don't have to do all this other stuff. You don't have to provide benefits. You still can charge a premium as a solo business owner, and the business benefits because they don't have to hire a full-time equivalent until they're ready. So all of a sudden you can get somebody that's got take two people, the cost of one full-time equivalent that were C-level or director level or ran something in large companies for 20 years. Holy cow, the impact that they could have on these small businesses, right?
Oh yeah,
and,
absolutely.
And the other thing I think is important too, you brought up technology, because when AI first surfaced, it was like, oh my gosh. And our listeners know that Eileen and I have done multiple episodes on AI, so we're fascinated with it. But the wise Eileen Rochford once said, they're paying us for our ideas. And that gave me a ton of confidence to realize this job that I'm doing, that you all are doing, isn't just something that you can plug in and spit out something, genius, because we're a product of our experiences and we are getting paid for our ideas. So I just wanted to bring that up too, because I'll never forget when you said that, Eileen. It's like, that's what they're doing. They're paying us for our ideas.
That's right. And I think that's a huge aspect of what the future of work looks like, particularly for knowledge workers like us. No matter the amount that AI comes into play, all that does is make certain processes perhaps a little faster, not necessarily more accurate, not necessarily better, but AI will never be able to replace great ideas and great strategy that comes from people like us.
Yeah. People who lived it.
It almost makes it more valuable, in my opinion. And I think people are starting to realize that. So that creates an even more ripe environment for people to leave corporate and sell kind of the fruits of their experiences, as you've put it, Brett, because they're even more valuable. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll leave you maybe two quick examples that I like to use to people. So one is the, blockbuster movie, right? I told you I saw Twisters last night. Great. But when you think about how that movie was put together, it wasn't one company that had all these employees, right? It was a bunch of small and solo companies, hair, makeup, artists, script, writers, everything came together to build this, put this together. Then they went their separate ways, and these groups probably worked together on something else and then moved forward. To me, that just makes a lot more sense. And we're the solo companies that can come together to help companies break off, go. And I share the Ocean's 11 example, right? When Clooney wants to rob the casino, but he needs specialists to come in and do different things. He doesn't bring a company in. He's brought the folks that he knows that can get the job done and deliver, and everybody profits from it. And then they go back and do their own thing. So it's not like this is a new concept. I think, we could spend an whole episode on Industrial Revolution, how it forced offices and all these things. But I think we're coming back to the more natural way that we work and live is the solo type of businesses.
It's almost expert based or talent based in a way. Yeah.
Exactly.
That flexibility to kind of make it, as big as you need it to be, as small as you need it to be, or as precise as you need to be, or niche. Yeah.
And for as long as you need it to be, right? You may need somebody to come in and help you set up and establish marketing, or, if a company's got a marketer they like, but maybe it's a junior person that's been there out of college for 3 years, think they have talent, bring somebody that ran marketing for, Standard & Poor's for 5 years to come mentor this person to bring them up. They're not going to get that experience anywhere else, but we can start to leverage and get paid for doing some things different ways. Now, I would caution people not to chase too many shiny objects at once. I can be guilty of that, but as long as it's kind of stick to your core expertise, there's just different ways you can build for it.
Well, you just made me think about something like, how smart would that be to bring in someone on a fractional basis to kind of grow, help advance some of our more junier folks here? I honestly had never thought of that. So thank you.
Professional development, right? I mean,
right
that is a great idea.
Professional development.
Yes, absolutely. So, Brett, if somebody's interested about pivoting and writing the next chapter in their professional life, what do you think the most important things are they must consider and make priorities?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, if you would have asked me this before I left, it would have been a different answer. But in hindsight, one of the things that I'm so thankful that I had the opportunity to do after the fact is really define what I want, right? When you're in corporate, you're really not defining what you want. You're hoping to make some money or get that promotion. But now, right, again, I'm hoping to live a healthy, longer life. So what do I want my next 30 years to look like? And definitely corporate wasn't in it. But when I sat down with my wife to think about, well, do we even have shared goals? What do we want to do, and where do we want to go? Where do we want to work? How much money do we need? And I'm sure there's folks out there shaking their heads like, why haven't you financially planned? And it's part of it's financially planning, but part of it is really, what do we want to do? Because we can take control. So think about what you want. And then the other thing that I really encourage people to get started, think about the problem that you want to solve. Because too often we go from, well, I'll be a fractional head of sales, which is fine. But what I find works better is think about what that problem you want to solve, or what you do in your job today, or you've done over the course of 20 years that you really like to do. And that's what you're going to take to the small and mid-sized companies and say, hey, I can help you solve this, right? You don't have to position it as A or B, but this is how I work. This is how I can help you. And it's such an easier conversation than trying to force, right, a consulting engagement sometimes, or even a fractional, by just developing a relationship you're going to get paid for. But again, around the problem. So you don't have to have all your offerings completely ironed out. You don't have to have a fancy website. You don't have to have all of those things. It's really about thinking about what you want to do, how you solve it, and ideally, how do you solve it differently? If you can tell a different story, then you're going to do just fine. And then how do we help them gain the confidence? Because I think that's the other thing. It's amazing when you've had this storied and unbelievably successful corporate career, but you don't think you can sell the $10 million a year manufacturer 2 doors right in your neighborhood, that you can help them. It's just a mindset shift, not just, but that's one of the biggest things.
Yeah. I loved what you said about figuring out what you loved about the job that you did inside. That's so important. And I just want to pause and underscore that for everybody, because I think that's the game changer. But when you can focus or really spend the majority of your time doing those things or that thing that you truly loved and were great at, and you don't have to do the rest of it anymore.
Yeah.
That seems to me to be the biggest silver lining of leaving corporate and taking the leap to go out on your own.
I think so. And one of the interesting things I've found more recently with some of the folks I work with directly is because we talk through what their corporate roles and responsibilities were. They kind of map out what does an offering look like, right? Like, where do you want to focus? But what I'm finding is there's kind of two sides to this coin. One is the corporate work you did, and the other is kind of the coaching, right? So one woman was in the wellness space, or still is, but she was more interested and passionate about helping other women that were slightly behind where they were in their wellness journey or what they're not getting at work, versus helping companies build out or improve their wellness. So I think there's two sides to it. I always encourage people, go with what take the most friction out of it, get some momentum. But if you're passionate, kind of like what I'm transitioning, because when I started, it was all the business side. In another month, I'm going to be 100% focused on the corporate escapee and helping people get out. That wasn't even on my radar, right? 18 months ago, if that, and even 6 months ago, it wasn't even a possibility. So, find the path of least resistance to get out, get the momentum, and then all the doors open up.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic advice. Can we spend just a minute on what someone's professional life can look like outside of the stresses and the adrenaline, which is a negative, of what we experience inside of the corporate professional life? Tell us what it's like once you leave those doors.
It's freeing. It's like I said, I don't think the environment was toxic, because these businesses are doing what's right for the business, and just not having, I think it keeps coming back to the freedom and the flexibility and time. Because part of what I'll keep saying in my messaging is, when I was in corporate, if I had to work out, it had to be, before 6 a.m. or in the evening. So what basically that means is it didn't happen, right?
Right.
Because there was no way that, like now I've got my schedule set up that at 9 o'clock, I can walk to the gym every morning for 90 minutes, do the gym, breakfast, everything else, then get back to work. And nobody's on me because I own my own schedule. So that was kind of the biggest thing. And I joke with folks that people who have known me in corporate, I would have been more, it's money, right? We're doing this. But now it is, what is, on a bigger purpose, what is the why? Why are you doing this? What do you want to do? You have the time to do it. How do we make the most out of, Jesse Itzler? I don't know if you guys know Jesse. I heard him say a quote the other day. I think he's a year younger than me. And he said, statistically speaking, right, we're going to live to 77. He was 56. That means I've got 21 summers left. Yeah. How am I going to get the most out of those 21 summers? I'm like, yes. I never thought that way until I got out of corporate. And now everything is kind of the priority. We prioritize what we're doing. And I don't know about you guys, I'm sure the energy level, and aren't you just more enthused about generally everything?
Yeah.
Once you got out of it. So,
having skin in the game really changes everything, doesn't it?
It does.
And also the free, like that, when you own your own life, you said own your own schedule. I think I've often thought of it as owning my life. And that's how it felt differently, and still does to this day, 21 years later. To own my own life is so empowering. It's so validating. And I feel like I'm worth so much more. I don't even know why.
And to kind of piggyback off of something that you said earlier, relative to your wife was asking, what was going on? And while you're in the middle of that and you're just trying to get through to the next day, you don't always realize it. And then all of a sudden you take a step back, or you make a radical pivot to something else, and people will say, oh my gosh, you seem so much happier. But while I was doing it, I wasn't sitting there saying, oh gosh, I'm so unhappy or unfulfilled or whatever the case may be. But I was dragging them along with me. They didn't have a choice, right? They're my family. And then all of a sudden to be able to take that step back and have some introspection is really a huge point. And so it kind of, I think, dovetails off of what you said earlier, Brett, and certainly what you were just talking about, Eileen.
Yeah. And can I give you one more example where I think, it opened up and expanded or improved the family life is in corporate, my wife knew when, I was getting paid, what I was getting paid. And so she really didn't know what I was doing, but it was comfortable. We had benefits, so she could go about doing what she needed to do. When I went solo, she had no insight, right? So this was, I underappreciated how much stress this was putting her under because there was no give me's in the sense of what was going on. So it was about just over a year ago, we started having, you may laugh, but a quarterly business review. Her and I would sit down, go through all the business numbers so she could see exactly where we're at, where the expenses are, what I was thinking we're going to do the next quarter. And her and I would then think up again, what do we think we want to do the next quarter and beyond? And so that just eliminated doesn't eliminate all the stress, but a lot of the stress from a relationship, because now she could actually see what was going on, even though it's still scary. But I didn't realize, like I said, if anybody's going through this, you haven't brought your significant other or whoever is into it, I would highly recommend going through this type of a process because it greatly improved our relationship just by taking some of that unknown out of it.
That is fantastic advice. To acknowledge how important it is in a relationship of whether you're married, no matter the age you are, but if one or both in a relationship are going to embark on solo life or independent team life, that you own the business, you got to have quarterly business reviews. That my husband and I do a mini version each month, and we do it every quarter. And at the end of every year, we do a little 2-day retreat where we celebrate all the great stuff we did and the huge accomplishments we had. And we look back at the year, high five each other, have a great weekend. Because it's so important to have the visibility and the shared understanding, but then also to take that time at the end of the year. I love that idea. I also take out our investment portfolio for our retirement at the end of every year and say, look what we did. Come on. Because there's something, it's just meaning it's important to acknowledge, even if you only had a 5% return or maybe it didn't do that great, even because we've had some recent years where that's happened to a lot of people.
Yeah.
You still tried, and you had a plan, you committed to it, you followed through on it. There's confidence that's derived from that. But I think what you're highlighting, Brett, is so important. It's that shared understanding that gets created when you have the conversations and being intentional and, putting it on the calendar and saying, we're going to do this.
I feel like you just expressed we're in parallel universes here, because to go from W-2 to go from getting paid you knew exactly when you're getting paid, you knew exactly how much you're getting paid. And then I had to sell her on, if I got to go eat what I kill. That means there is no paycheck if I don't go earn it. And now I'm a 1099 and W-9 person. It's a lot different experience. And even to this day, 5+ years later, I just thanked her a couple of days ago, just out of the blue. I just said thank you, because that was such a scary journey. And even though it was scary for me, I knew what I was doing, I think, but I was in the midst of it all day and she wasn't. And she's like, what is going on? But she was she was a trooper. And as a partner in the LLC, we do the same things you all are talking about. Like every so often, every quarter, a couple times a year, we have a retreat. Yep. Every quarter we sit there and talk about, what's going on with the business. Let's take a look back. Let's take a look forward. And so I just think you nailed one of the most important points, even though we're talking about professional life, the corporate escapee kind of thing, to bring the significant other, the wife, the husband along is vital. And I think that was just one of the most important things you just said.
Yeah.
Yeah. In hindsight, I would have done it back when I was still in corporate. Having that type of meeting would have been helpful, right? And in hindsight's 2020, but better late than never. So yeah. But I am we don't do the retreat. I need to bake that in. That's a really, really good idea.
Yeah. Yes. Kohler.
I think you can write those American off Club. Too, if I'm not mistaken.
I just put in a plug for the American Club, Rob. When the first 10 years, that's where we would go. I'd be like, we can get away for a night. We're going to the American Club. Yeah.
Maybe it could be the next sponsor of the podcast.
Yeah, right.
Right. There you go. Great idea.
We've been there enough that I should hit him up.
So we've talked about some positive things here, but we've also talked about some sobering things. As we leave this conversation in the spirit of positive thinking, what kind of advice would you give people who are pondering this, who are saying, that's really interesting, or I'm not sure if I'm ready to make that jump? What kind of advice would you give people who may want to go on this journey?
Yeah, number one is just educate yourself. It doesn't cost you anything. Go through the path. Like I said, if you're looking for a job, you know how hard that is. Start to network with some smaller businesses. I know if you're starting from 0 to 1, there's some steps you need to go to figure out, again, what's the problem you're going to solve, those types of things. But talk to people. Like I said, the beauty of this community, and it's helped me probably more than some of the people I brought in, is having those people to talk to. Giving use cases, right? So we've got folks that are in IT, communications, you name it, and they come from a different background, but they're all driving towards the same thing. And what I found with newbies, they like to hear from folks that are, they've been doing this for 5 years, they've been doing this for 2 years, they've been doing this for 4 days. Like I had somebody on the podcast not too long ago. She came on after the 4th day, officially being a solo. And so it's just, again, hearing other people's story. And I think the other thing is you can't sugarcoat it, because it's not going to be, was it lollipops and rainbows or
right.
From the
rainbows and unicorns.
Thank you. It's close. But it's driving towards that. You control the future. What you said, Eileen, made so much sense. You control your life. You control your future. You work what you want to work. It's there. And again, I will tell the people that if you've been successful in corporate and somebody's paying you in corporate, you have the skills to be successful on your own. You just do. There's one thing, and I'll talk about, people get freaked out by sales. I don't know how to sell. Like you get, this is one of those little things. You change the framework. You're not selling, you're problem solving. And if you're solving a problem, there's a price to pay to have that problem solved. That's all it is. It's not like you forcing somebody to do this. It's like, hey, do you have a problem? Hey, I can fix this. A couple ways I can do it. And if it doesn't work, that used to bother me. But now I'm like, hey, if it's not a fit, it's not a fit. We're fine. But I think just changing that mindset is game changing for a lot of people. It seems simple, but it works.
Yeah, great advice. Absolutely. Well, Brett, it was an honor having you on our show today, and a true pleasure. I just want to acknowledge that, first of all, it's really brave to do what you did. But you went way beyond, meaning leaving corporate, but you went way beyond that. And it's just so selfless to want to help people to achieve that same, level of freedom in their lives. By creating this community, you're doing this huge solid for so many, many, many people. And I heard that listening to, guests on your own show, their own gratitude and what they learn from the community that you've created. So that's a wonderful thing. Thanks for doing that.
I appreciate that. No, I'm enjoying it. Like I said, energized. Again, my only regret, I didn't start it sooner, but we all I don't look backwards very often. So what do we do going forward? So, but I appreciate that. And I enjoyed this. This was a really fun conversation. So thank you for having me.
Good. We're delighted. Okay. Is that going to do it for our show, Rob? Do we have to say goodbye now?
I think we do. We can do whatever we want to, but it's probably time. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to just give Brett the opportunity to tell our listeners where people can find him first. And I'll certainly include it in the show notes, but I'd love to hear you say, particularly on TikTok, where are we going to find you?
Exactly. Which I never thought I would be saying on podcasts is, check and follow me on TikTok, but it's the Corporate Escapee, and you can put in the show notes. The one thing what's been an eye opener for me is I've got a bunch of, spoof accounts out there. So make sure it is the right one.
Got it.
So I'll send you guys the actual link, but it is just the Corporate Escapee. Or if you want to start with LinkedIn, that's my preferred choice. We're all in corporate or coming from corporate. So connect with me there. And if you're thinking about it, or even more curious about life outside of corporate, or if you've left corporate but not where you want to be, come join the community. It's Slack, a bunch of really good people in there, and it'll help you at least figure out if this is a path you want to head down.
And how do they get into that Slack community?
Just send me a note. I'll send you guys a link. They can actually connect right from the show notes if they want.
Perfect. Yes. So. Wonderful. We will include all of that in the show notes. Thank you.
That is fabulous. Well, that is going to do it for another edition of Can You Hear Me? I'm Rob Johnson. And if you'd like to comment on the podcast or suggest a topic, please reach out to us at our new Can You Hear Me podcast page on LinkedIn.
And I'm Eileen Rochford. If you like this show, please consider giving us a review on any of the platforms where you find your podcasts. and where you find Can You Hear Me, this awesome podcast. Your reviews help other potential listeners to find our show, and we always want to spread the good word. So thanks everybody for listening.